True story. They thought I was too old to understand until I called the FBI on their scheme. Have you ever poured your entire being into nurturing a seed, watching it grow into a magnificent tree, only for it to one day shade you out, leaving you withered in its shadow? Have you ever given your heart, your energy, your very essence to someone, believing you were building a foundation of love, only to find yourself systematically dismantled piece by agonizing piece? Have you ever felt the bitter sting of irrelevance, the cold weight of being cast aside by the very people you lived for? I have. Oh, I have. But they didn't know I would be the one to write the final unexpected chapter of their story. They thought I was an old woman, a relic, easily manipulated and dismissed. They thought wrong. Have you ever watched the child you devoted your life to cast you aside for the person they married? Have you ever witnessed your own flesh and blood become a stranger, their eyes cold, their silence deafening, while the one they chose systematically dismantled your dignity, piece by agonizing piece? I have. Oh, I have. But they didn't know I would be the one to write the final unexpected chapter of their story. They thought I was an old woman, a relic, easily manipulated and dismissed. They thought wrong. The final disrespect, the one that solidified the steel in my spine and cleared the fog of my long-suffering heart, happened on a Tuesday. Not just any Tuesday, mind you, but a Tuesday evening that Lux, my daughter-in-law, had meticulously orchestrated as one of her family bonding dinners. I use air quotes because for Lux, every event was a performance, every interaction a means to an end. The table was set with her finest china, the kind she only brings out for her social media posts, sparkling under the dining room's new, ridiculously oversized chandelier. Its crystal facets, chosen by Lux, scattered light in a way that felt aggressive, too bright, unlike the warm, mellow glow of the antique brass fixture Arthur and I had chosen decades ago, which she had insisted be replaced. My son, Caspian, sat opposite me, meticulously carving the roast chicken, his movements precise, almost mechanical, as if he were performing a task he had rehearsed 1,000 times. Lux, naturally, was at the head of the table, radiating an almost feverish excitement that I knew, deep in my bones, boded ill. Her smile was wide, almost predatory, her eyes gleaming with an ambition that always seemed to overshadow any genuine warmth. "Alara," she began, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that always put my teeth on edge, a cloying sound that felt more like a threat than an endearment. "We have some truly wonderful news to share with you tonight. Something that's going to change all our lives. For the better, of course." She beamed, glancing at Caspian, who offered a weak, almost imperceptible nod, a mere tremor of his chin that spoke volumes of his discomfort. My stomach tightened. I'd learned to recognize the warning signs of Lux's good news. It always, without fail, involved a grand scheme designed to benefit her, usually at someone else's expense, and more often than not, that someone else was me. Her pronouncements were never about shared joy. They were always about her ascendance. "As you know," she continued, her gaze sweeping around the room as if addressing a vast, invisible audience, or perhaps her legion of social media followers she pretended were always watching, "my influence is growing exponentially. Brands are practically begging me for collaborations, and my online presence is, well, frankly, exploding. But to truly capitalize on this momentum, to truly elevate our family's standing, I need a proper base of operations. A creative hub, a studio, well, a headquarters." She paused for dramatic effect, letting her words hang in the air like a poorly executed theatrical monologue, waiting for applause that never came from me, only from her own self-satisfaction. She leaned back slightly, her posture radiating a manufactured confidence, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, almost like a presenter on a stage. Caspian finally spoke, his voice unusually strained, a low murmur that barely reached me across the polished mahogany table. "Mom, Lux has been working incredibly hard on this. It's a huge opportunity." He wouldn't meet my eyes. He never did when Lux was about to unleash one of her pronouncements, or when he was complicit in a decision he knew would hurt me. His gaze was fixed on the perfectly symmetrical slices of chicken on his plate, as if the fate of the universe depended on their uniform thickness. I could see the tension in his jaw, the slight tremor in his hand as he put down the carving knife. It was a familiar pattern, one that had played out countless times over the years. Then came the knife twist, a familiar, sickening sensation in the pit of my being. And that's where your lovely home comes in, Alara. Lux purred, a predatory gleam in her eyes, a flash of something cold and calculating that made my blood run cold. My home. My sanctuary. The house my late husband, Arthur, and I had built our lives in. Every brick, every creak in the floorboards, every sunbeam through the living room window held a memory. This was the house where Caspian had grown up, where we'd celebrated countless birthdays, Christmases, and quiet, ordinary evenings filled with laughter and love. The garden, which I had cultivated with my own hands for decades, bloomed outside, a testament to enduring life. We've been consulting with real estate agents, looking at market trends, and it's simply perfect for what we need. The location, the space, the potential for a complete renovation into a modern minimalist influencer studio. It's ideal. Her voice crescendoed, filled with an almost manic enthusiasm. My fork clattered against my plate, the sound startlingly loud in the sudden, heavy silence. It echoed the tremor in my own hands. My home. I managed, my voice a thin whisper barely audible, a fragile thread against the rising tide of disbelief. You mean my home? The one I live in? The absurdity of it, the sheer audacity, struck me like a physical blow, a cold wave washing over me. I felt a sudden faintness, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Lux waved a dismissive hand, a gesture of impatience, as if I were a child asking foolish questions. Oh, darling Alara, don't be so dramatic. We're not kicking you out, as you so quaintly put it. We're helping you. Think of it as simplifying your life. The upkeep on this place, it's just too much for someone your age. All those stairs, all that garden. You're always complaining about the weeds, aren't you? She even dared to inject a condescending chuckle. We've found a lovely, charming little assisted living facility, just outside the city. It has a wonderful community activities, 3 meals a day. You wouldn't have to lift a finger. Think of it, Alara, no more cooking, no more cleaning, no more worrying about leaky faucets or overgrown bushes. And the best part, she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if sharing a delightful secret. The proceeds from selling this house would be more than enough to cover your expenses there for years, and fund my new venture. It's a win-win for everyone. My breath caught in my throat, a painful constriction in my chest. Assisted living? After a lifetime of fiercely guarded independence? To fund her business? The gall. The sheer, unmitigated gall. My mind reeled. This house was not just bricks and mortar. It was the repository of my entire adult life, every joy, every sorrow, every quiet moment of contentment with Arthur. It was my anchor in a world that had become increasingly turbulent. And she wanted to tear it down, replace it with a minimalist influencer studio, and pack me away like an unwanted antique. I looked at Caspian, searching for any flicker of recognition, any hint of the kind, thoughtful boy I had raised. His face was a mask, utterly blank, his gaze fixed on the perfectly carved chicken on his plate. He knew. He had to know. And he was letting it happen. The silence from him was deafening, a betrayal more profound than Lux's cruel words. Caspian, I said, my voice barely above a croak, a desperate plea that felt as if it came from a great distance. Is this true? You're agreeing to this? He finally looked up, his eyes clouded with what I told myself was guilt, though it might have just been discomfort. His jaw was tight, his lips pressed into a thin line. Mom, it's practical. Lux is right. This house is big, and you've always said you wanted to simplify. This is an opportunity for all of us. It would secure our financial future and you'd be taken care of. His voice was low, almost apologetic, but it lacked conviction. It was the voice of a man trapped, or perhaps, a man who had chosen his captor. Taken care of? My voice rose, betraying the tremor in my hands, the rising tide of indignation. Like a burden? Like something to be packed away and forgotten? This is my home, Caspian. This is where your father and I built our lives. This is where you grew up. Do you remember the treehouse Arthur built for you in the backyard? The height chart on the kitchen door frame? The smell of your father's pipe tobacco in the den? Are those just bricks and mortar to you? Lux laughed, a brittle, dismissive sound that grated on my ears, devoid of any genuine amusement. Oh, Alara, stop being so sentimental. It's just bricks and mortar. We're offering you a fresh start. A chance to declutter, to embrace a new carefree chapter. Honestly, you're making this much harder than it needs to be. We thought you'd be thrilled. Caspian and I have been working on this for months, planning every detail. Her words were a chilling revelation. Months. They had been planning to dispose of me, to sell my home out from under me for months. And Caspian, my son, had been a part of it. The silence from him was a scream in my ears, louder than any insult Lux could ever hurl. It was the silence of complicity, of betrayal, of a son who had chosen a superficial, greedy stranger over the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. In that moment, watching him sit there, utterly passive, utterly detached, something inside me shifted. The endless reservoir of patience, of understanding, of quiet endurance finally, irrevocably ran dry. They thought I was too old to understand. They thought I was confused. But I understood perfectly. And in that instant, a quiet, cold resolve settled over me. They wanted to play games? Oh, we would play. And you think this was the first time? Oh, if only. If only that Tuesday dinner was an isolated incident, a sudden, inexplicable lapse in judgment. No, dear friend. That was merely the grand finale. The final jarring chord in a symphony of calculated disrespect that had been playing for years. Where do I even begin? Perhaps at the beginning, when Lux first entered our lives, a whirlwind of designer labels, a meticulously curated social media feed, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I remember the day Caspian first brought her home to meet Arthur and me. It was a Sunday afternoon, usually a time for quiet reflection and family stories. She arrived in a cloud of expensive perfume, her phone already out, capturing every angle of our modest, comfortable home, commenting on its quaintness with a faint air of disdain. Arthur, ever the gentleman, tried to engage her in conversation, but her answers were always brief, superficial, drifting back to her brand and reach. I saw a flicker of concern in Arthur's eyes that day, a subtle tightening of his jaw that I understood. He had always been perceptive, able to see through facades. He had merely smiled and said, "She's lively, isn't she, Alara?" And I, ever the optimist, had hoped she would soften, that Caspian's love would somehow temper her relentless ambition. How foolish I had been. Caspian was always a good boy, a kind son. Not particularly ambitious perhaps, but steady, dependable. He loved his father and me fiercely. He was the kind of son who would drop everything to help you, who would listen patiently to your worries, and whose quiet presence was a comfort. He'd spend hours in the garden with Arthur, learning about roses, or sit with me in the evenings just talking about his day. But when he met Lux, it was as if a switch had been flicked. Suddenly, our quiet family dinners felt uninspired, our modest home seemed inadequate, and my presence, I could feel it, became an inconvenience. Lux began to dictate everything. From the lighting in the living room to the type of coffee we served, every detail had to align with her aesthetic, her brand vision. Our home, once a haven of warmth and shared history, slowly became a set piece for her digital life. First it was subtle. Lux would gently suggest that I might enjoy a nice, quiet afternoon while they went out, implying I was too frail for their activities, or that my opinions would somehow hinder their progressive path. "Oh, Alara, darling, you really shouldn't overexert yourself. Caspian and I are going for a hike. It's quite strenuous, you know. Why don't you put your feet up and watch your programs?" She'd say, her voice overly sweet, a thinly veiled dismissal. Or she'd volunteer to help me with my finances, scrutinizing every penny, every investment, as if I were a child incapable of managing my own affairs, despite having managed our household budget meticulously for half a century. She'd sigh dramatically over my utility bills. "So much wasted energy, Alara. Do you really need all those lights on?" Even though I was perfectly frugal. I remember one Christmas Eve a few years after they married. Arthur had passed away by then, and it was just Caspian, Lux, and me. It was my first Christmas without Arthur, and I desperately wanted to make it special, to honor his memory and hold on to our traditions. I had spent days preparing his favorite dishes, baking cookies, decorating the house with the ornaments we'd collected over decades, handmade gifts from Caspian's childhood, delicate glass baubles passed down from my grandmother, each with its own story. The house was a cozy, shimmering wonderland, filled with the scent of pine and cinnamon. Lux arrived, sweeping in with a dramatic sigh, declaring the house cluttered and a fire hazard because of the lights. Honestly, Alara, it's a bit much, isn't it? All those dusty baubles. It's not very clean. She then spent the entire evening on her phone, live-streaming a cozy Christmas that bore no resemblance to the reality of the room, editing out anything that wasn't perfectly Instagrammable, including, I suspect, my very existence. She'd angle her phone just so, carefully cropping out the worn armchair Arthur used to sit in, or the overflowing bookshelf in the corner that spoke of a lifetime of reading. When I offered her a plate of warm cookies, my famous gingerbread men that Caspian had always adored, she looked at me as if I had offered her a dead mouse. Oh, Alara, please. Do you know how many calories are in those? My followers expect me to maintain a certain physique. Caspian just sat there, nursing a drink, a distant look in his eyes, his gaze fixed on the fireplace. Not a word in my defense. Not a single word. My heart ached, a deep, hollow pain that only a mother could know. Then there was the slow, insidious erosion of my role in the family. I used to be the cornerstone, the one Caspian came to for advice, for comfort. When he was heartbroken in college, he came to me. When he was unsure about his first job, he sought my counsel. But Lux systematically chipped away at that. Any time I offered an opinion, however gently, on anything from their financial decisions to Caspian's career choices, Lux would interject with a dismissive wave. Oh, Alara, bless your heart, but things have changed so much. You just wouldn't understand the modern world. It's all about algorithms and personal branding now, not your old-fashioned common sense. Or even worse, she'd turn to Caspian and say, loud enough for me to hear, your mother is getting a bit confused, isn't she, darling? We should probably just let her rest. And Caspian would nod, his eyes avoiding mine, a silent agreement that felt like a knife twisting in my heart. He would mumble something about Mom's well-being or not wanting her to worry, but it was always a capitulation, never a defense. I remember one particularly painful instance when I had offered to babysit their little girl, Clara, my beautiful granddaughter. I adored Clara. She was a ray of sunshine in my increasingly dim world, a tiny beacon of pure, unadulterated joy. Her giggles were music to my ears, and her innocent questions filled me with a purpose I thought I had lost. Lux had agreed reluctantly because her usual nanny had cancelled at the last minute for a more lucrative gig. As Lux had put it with a sneer, I spent the day with Clara, reading her stories from my worn, beloved collection of children's books, baking cookies, the kind Clara loved, not the kind Lux would demonize, filled with chocolate chips and real butter, and playing in the garden, showing her the ladybugs and the vibrant petals of the petunias. We laughed, truly laughed, and for a few hours I felt like myself again, whole and cherished. When Lux returned, she swept in, barely acknowledging me, her gaze immediately scrutinizing Clara, as if she were a product on display. Did you let her eat sugar? Her complexion looks dull. And why is her hair not perfectly braided? Honestly, Alara, it's not that hard. I pay a professional for this for a reason. She then turned to Caspian, who was standing awkwardly by the door, already anticipating the tirade. You see, darling, this is precisely why we need to be more careful. Mother is simply not equipped for this level of responsibility anymore. Her reflexes are slow, and her memory isn't what it used to be. Clara needs constant stimulation, not just quiet play. Caspian mumbled something about me doing my best, but it was a pathetic, half-hearted attempt, his eyes glued to the floor. The damage was done. My heart ached not just for the insult, but for the implication that I was somehow unfit to care for my own grandchild, to share the simple joys of childhood. I could feel Clara's small hand slip into mine, as if she sensed my hurt, and her innocent squeeze was the only thing that kept me from crumbling. The financial requests began subtly, then escalated. Alara, could you possibly lend us a little something for a down payment on a new car? It's crucial for my brand image. My current vehicle is simply not projecting the right level of success. Or, we're a bit strapped this month, could you cover the utilities? Just until my next big collaboration comes through. It's going to be huge. I always helped. Always. Because I loved my son, and I believed, foolishly perhaps, that if I continued to be generous, continued to be there, they would eventually see my worth, or at least remember my love. I remembered Arthur's wise words. Family sticks together, Alara. We support each other. And I took that to heart. But each time my generosity was met with more demands, more disdain. Lux started referring to my pension as our family fund, and treated my savings account as an extension of her own. She even had the audacity to suggest I downsize my wardrobe, claiming my clothes were outdated, and that I should invest in more modern pieces to reflect better on the family. It was always about appearances, about her image, never about my comfort or my desires. My modest savings, carefully accumulated over decades, dwindled. My pension, which was meant to provide for my quiet twilight years, was siphoned off, little by little, to fuel her insatiable appetite for superficial status. And Caspian? My son, my sweet boy. He became a ghost in his own home, a muted reflection of the man he once was. He stopped calling me unless Lux prompted him, and even then his tone was rushed, preoccupied. When he did visit, his conversations were strained, superficial, filled with empty pleasantries and careful avoidance of any real topic. He'd avoid eye contact, fidget, and rush off as soon as he could, always with some urgent excuse related to Lux's schedule or her important business. I saw the conflict in his eyes sometimes, the flicker of the old Caspian, the boy who would confide in me, the man who knew right from wrong, but it was always quickly extinguished by Lux's presence, by her cold stare, by her subtle cues, a raised eyebrow, a dismissive flick of her wrist. She had systematically isolated him, turning him into a puppet, his strings held firmly in her perfectly manicured hands. He started repeating her phrases, mimicking her dismissive tone, even using her cutting remarks about my age and confusion. "Mom, you just don't understand how things work now." He'd echo the very words Lux used. It was heartbreaking to watch, like seeing a part of my own soul slowly wither and die. They called me a burden. They called me confused. They treated me like a senile old woman, incapable of independent thought or action. They believed their carefully constructed narrative about my diminished capacity, a narrative they had woven for years to justify their exploitation. They wanted my home, my resources, my very life force, to fuel their insatiable greed and superficial ambitions. They thought I had nothing left to offer but my dwindling assets, nothing left to give but my quiet, mournful surrender. But they didn't know about the final secret my late husband, Arthur, left me. They didn't know about the old family homestead, tucked away in the countryside, miles from the city, a place of sprawling fields and ancient oak trees. It was the original Alara family property, passed down through generations, not just a house, but a piece of history, a repository of memories. It was a place where my own ancestors had found solace and strength. Arthur had inherited it long before we met. A wild, untamed piece of land with a sturdy, modest farmhouse that had stood for centuries. He had always loved it, visiting it whenever he needed to clear his head, to connect with something elemental and true. And when we married, he quietly put the deed in my name. "Just in case, my love," he'd said, a twinkle in his eye, his hand gently squeezing mine. "A little safety net, a little piece of our legacy just for you. For your independence always." We never spoke of it much after that, content in our city home. It was a secret kept between us, a silent promise, a hidden treasure, a symbol of his enduring love and foresight. I maintained it over the years, quietly, discreetly, paying the taxes, ensuring it was structurally sound, visiting it a few times a year for quiet reflection, never mentioning its existence to anyone, especially not to Lux. It was my private solace, a place I could escape to in my mind when the world became too much, a place where the air was clean and the stars were bright. It represented freedom, independence, and a connection to something real and enduring, unlike the ephemeral world Lux inhabited. It was the antithesis of everything she stood for. The moment I decided to use it, to unleash this hidden power, was not a sudden explosion of anger. No, it was a quiet, cold, resolute decision that formed in the pit of my stomach during that horrific Tuesday dinner. Watching Caspian's silent complicity, listening to Lux's callous plans for my home, for me, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. The fog of sorrow and resignation that had enveloped me since Arthur's passing began to lift, replaced by a sharp, invigorating chill. This wasn't just about my house anymore. This was about my dignity, my autonomy, my very existence. They had pushed me too far. They had mistaken my patience for weakness, my quiet nature for senility. They had taken everything I had given them, my love, my support, my financial assistance, and thrown it back in my face with a sneer. The fire that had dwindled within me for so long roared back to life, a silent internal inferno. That night, after they had left, after I had sat alone in the echoing silence of my soon-to-be sold home, the quiet resolve hardened into an unbreakable conviction. The house felt strangely hollow, as if its soul had been stripped away by their greedy pronouncements. I didn't cry. There were no tears left, only a cold, hard knot of determination. I walked to the old dusty trunk in the attic, the one Arthur had always called his treasure chest, a vast wooden box filled with remnants of our life together. There, beneath yellowed letters tied with faded ribbons and old photographs of smiling faces that seemed to mock the present, lay the original deed to the heritage property. It felt heavy in my hands, not just parchment and ink, but years of family history, a lifetime of quiet resilience, a tangible piece of Arthur's enduring love. The next morning I made a call, then another, and another. I contacted a trusted lawyer, a man Arthur had dealt with for decades, Mr. Davies, whose reputation for integrity and discretion was impeccable. He was someone completely unconnected to Caspian or Lux's circle, someone who would understand the nuances of my request. I explained my situation concisely, calmly, without a trace of emotion in my voice, as if discussing a business transaction. He listened, his silence a comforting presence, his steady breathing on the other end of the line a balm to my raw nerves. "Mrs. Alara," he said, his voice grave but understanding, "I understand completely. We can proceed with absolute discretion. I'll handle everything. You just tell me what you wish to achieve." Discretion was key. I wanted no leaks, no rumors, no inkling of my plans reaching Lux's ears. Every step had to be executed in absolute secrecy. I instructed him to put the heritage property on the market quietly. No grand announcements, no social media buzz, no flashy advertisements. Just a discreet sale to a reputable buyer. The market, Mr. Davies confirmed, was hot for such unique, historic properties, especially those with significant acreage and a rich backstory. I moved with a focused, almost surgical precision. While Lux was busy planning the grand reveal of her new business venture and the simplification of my life, oblivious to the hidden currents, I was quietly, methodically dismantling her entire future. I chose a cash buyer, an anonymous investment firm interested in agricultural land, ensuring a swift and clean transaction, leaving no paper trail that Lux could possibly follow. The funds were to be deposited into a new, separate account, one that Lux and Caspian knew nothing about, an account completely inaccessible to them, a fortress for my independence. I even arranged for a substantial portion of the proceeds to be placed in an irrevocable trust, specifically for Clara's future education, a detail that would sting Lux particularly sharply, as it would represent money she could never touch, money dedicated to true growth, not superficial gain. The decision was not made out of vengeance, not entirely. It was made out of a desperate need to reclaim my life, to protect myself and perhaps to deliver a painful but necessary lesson. They thought I was old, confused, and weak. They thought I had no cards left to play. They had systematically stripped me of everything they could, and now they wanted to take the very roof over my head. But they were about to learn that the quiet ones often hold the most formidable hand. The game was about to change. My resolve was iron, my purpose clear. And then the day came. The day everything would be laid bare. It was another one of Lux's infamous family dinners, held just a few weeks after that fateful Tuesday evening. She had scheduled it, no doubt, to finalize the details of my transition to assisted living, and to bask in the glow of her impending success, to revel in her perceived victory. I arrived, dressed in my usual unassuming attire, a simple dress, comfortable shoes, clothes that Lux had often scoffed at as drab or dated. I carried my worn leather handbag, which now, unbeknownst to them, contained the final irrefutable proof of their folly, the instruments of their undoing. The atmosphere was charged with a smug anticipation from Lux, and a strained awkwardness from Caspian. Lux was practically vibrating with excitement, her eyes sparkling with avarice. She had already started talking about demolition plans and rebranding strategies for my home, as if it were already hers, a blank canvas for her ego. She had even brought a stack of glossy architectural renderings, spread them across the dining table, her finger tracing lines, her voice filled with self-importance. And here, Ilara, is where your new quaint little apartment will be. See, just enough space for your essentials. She gestured to a tiny square on a floor plan of the assisted living facility, as if showing me a dog kennel, a place to be confined and forgotten. Her smile was wide, triumphant, utterly oblivious to the quiet storm brewing within me. Caspian, predictably, remained silent, his gaze fixed on the table, occasionally offering a non-committal grunt of agreement to Lux's pronouncements, a pathetic performance of feigned support. He looked pale, almost sickly, the shadows under his eyes speaking of restless nights. I wondered if the weight of his complicity was finally pressing down on him, if the guilt was a gnawing beast within. Now about the house sale, Lux announced, clasping her hands together, her eyes gleaming, a conductor poised to bring down the baton on her grand symphony. Our real estate agent is confident we can get top dollar. We're just waiting for your signature on the final paperwork, Ilara, and then we can put it on the market officially. Isn't that wonderful? Think of the freedom. The word freedom tasted like ash on my tongue, considering the cage she intended for me. I took a sip of water, allowing a small, almost imperceptible smile to play on my lips. It was a private smile, one of quiet knowledge. Oh yes, Lux, I said, my voice soft but clear, cutting through the cloying sweetness of her tone. Freedom. It's a truly precious thing, isn't it? She nodded enthusiastically, completely missing the double meaning, too caught up in her own narrative. Absolutely. And speaking of freedom and new chapters, Caspian and I have decided that with the proceeds from your home, we'll not only establish my brand headquarters, but also invest in a few other ventures. It's going to be transformative. Her eyes glittered with visions of wealth and fame. I placed my glass down, carefully, deliberately, the gentle clink against the table echoing in the suddenly expectant silence. You know, Lux, I began, my voice still calm, almost conversational, as if merely adding a trivial point to her grand speech. I've been thinking a lot about this house, this property. I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting my words sink in, creating a tension that was almost palpable. Caspian finally looked up, a flicker of unease in his eyes, a dawning suspicion that things were not proceeding as planned. Lux, however, was still beaming, oblivious, her self-satisfaction a thick shield. It is indeed a lovely home, I continued, my gaze sweeping around the dining room, taking in every detail, every memory. And it holds so many memories. But you're right, Lux, it's quite a lot for an old woman. And the truth is, I leaned forward slightly, my gaze locking onto Lux's, holding it steady, unwavering. This house, this property you've been so keen to sell, it was never actually going to be yours to sell. Lux's smile faltered, a crack appearing in her carefully constructed facade. Her brow furrowed slightly. What? What do you mean, Ilara? Of course it's yours. It's in your name. Her voice was still confident, but a sliver of uncertainty had crept in. Oh, it is, I agreed, my voice retaining its unnerving calm. And it still is. But you see, while you've been so focused on this house, so consumed with your plans for my life, you've overlooked a rather significant detail. A detail that my late husband, Arthur, and I kept very close to our chests for many, many years. I reached into my handbag, slowly, deliberately, savoring the moment, the quiet anticipation of the reveal. The rustle of paper seemed unnaturally loud in the suddenly silent room. A symphony of its own. Lux watched me, her eyes narrowed, a hint of suspicion now replacing her triumphant glee. Her lips parted slightly in confusion. Caspian's face had gone utterly white, a ghostly pallor, as if he knew instinctively that something profound and terrible was about to unfold. You see, I said, pulling out a sheaf of papers neatly folded, crisply new. Arthur was a very wise man. He believed in safety nets. And he also believed in legacies. This house, I gestured around the dining room, the house they thought was their prize, was always meant to be my comfortable home for my remaining years. But the true family fortune, the real legacy, was elsewhere. I unfolded the top document and laid it flat on the table, pushing aside Lux's glossy architectural renderings with a soft, decisive gesture. It was a certified copy of the original deed to the old heritage property, The one in the countryside, the one they knew nothing about. Its legalistic script seemed to hum with silent power. I then placed another document on top of it. A recent sale agreement dated just a week prior, its figures stark and irrefutable. Lux stared at the documents, her eyes wide, uncomprehending, her meticulously applied makeup suddenly seeming too harsh, too theatrical. Caspian, however, let out a choked gasp, a sound of pure visceral shock. He knew about the old homestead vaguely. He'd visited it a handful of times as a child, during idyllic summer days filled with fishing and exploring the woods, but like most things from his past, he'd long since dismissed it as insignificant, a dusty relic, a place too far removed from his modern city-centric life. He never knew his father had deeded it to me. He never knew its true value. This, I said, my voice gaining a quiet power, each word deliberate, precise, is the deed to the Alara family homestead, the one my husband inherited. And this, I tapped the sale agreement, my finger resting on the astonishing figures, is the official record of its sale. As of last week. Lux snatched the documents, her fingers trembling as she scanned the figures. Her eyes darted from the sale price. A truly significant sum, far more than this city house could ever fetch, a sum that dwarfed her wildest financial dreams, to the date, to the names. Her perfectly made-up face contorted, a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. The blood drained from her face, leaving her with a sickly green hue under the harsh chandelier light. "What is this?" she shrieked, her carefully composed facade shattering into 1,000 pieces, her voice high-pitched and raw with a fury that bordered on madness. You sold the ancestral property. Without telling us. Without consulting us." Her voice cracked with unadulterated rage, her perfectly manicured hands crumpling the crisp paper. "Why would I consult you, Lux?" I asked, my voice still calm, a stark contrast to her rising panic, a soothing balm that must have felt like ice to her burning anger. "It was never yours. It was always mine. My safety net. The one you conveniently overlooked while plotting to dispose of me." I paused, letting the words sink in, letting the full weight of my revelation crush her. "And the proceeds? They are quite substantial, as you can see. Enough to ensure my comfort and independence for the rest of my days. In this home, the one you so desperately wanted to sell out from under me. The one filled with my memories, my life." I then produced a final document, a printed bank statement, showing the recent transfer of a large sum into a new, secure account, its balance glowing with undeniable proof of my financial autonomy. "The funds are safely deposited, untouchable by anyone else. And a significant portion," I added, glancing pointedly at Lux, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips, "has been placed in an irrevocable trust, specifically for my granddaughter Clara's future education, ensuring her security, unlike the ephemeral brand empires you so eagerly chase, which are built on sand and greed." Lux gasped, a strangled sound of pure, unadulterated rage and disbelief. Her mouth opened and closed, no coherent words forming, only sputtering sounds of fury. The grand plans, the visions of wealth, the carefully constructed facade of her empire. It was all crumbling before her eyes. Not only was her funding gone, but she was now faced with the devastating realization that she had completely misjudged the woman she thought she could so easily manipulate. The humiliation was palpable, thick in the air, a choking fog of failure. Their scheme, their entire future built on my assumed weakness, had just imploded. And I, the quiet, unassuming old woman, had been the one to light the fuse. Caspian finally found his voice, a strangled whisper that seemed to echo in the now silent dining room. "Mom, you sold it? The old farm? You just did that?" He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock, confusion, and a burgeoning regret that I had waited so long to see, a flicker of the boy I once knew, staring at me with a lost, bewildered expression. "Yes, Caspian," I said, my gaze holding his, clear and unwavering. "I did. While you and your wife were busy plotting my removal, I was busy securing my future. And yours, perhaps, if you had only remembered where your true loyalty lay. But you chose to remain silent, didn't you, son? You stood by while she treated me like a senile burden, while she plotted to sell my home, to put me in a facility. You said nothing. You did nothing. You let her diminish me step by step, year after year. And now you see the consequences of that silence, of that choice. The color drained from his face, leaving him ashen. His shoulders slumped, as if the weight of his actions had finally settled upon him. Lux, meanwhile, was sputtering, incoherent with fury, her face blotchy, her composure utterly destroyed. The silence that followed my words was heavy, thick with the residue of shattered dreams and unmasked betrayal. So where is my daughter-in-law who called me the maid now, you ask? Where is Lux, the dazzling social media influencer who believed her brand was more important than family, more valuable than dignity? Well, the brand headquarters she so desperately coveted never materialized. Without the substantial capital she expected from the sale of my home, and certainly without the proceeds of the heritage property, which she discovered were truly locked away from her grasp, secured in that irrevocable trust and my new, impenetrable account, her grand plans collapsed like a house of cards. Her proposed business ventures fizzled out before they even began, dying whispers of ambition. She tried to secure other investments, desperately reaching out to her network, but her reputation for arrogance and a certain lack of financial prudence, which had been quietly observed by those in her industry, preceded her. The whispers about her difficult nature and her true motivations grew louder. Her social media presence, once so vibrant and carefully curated, began to show cracks. The lavish lifestyle she flaunted became harder to sustain without a constant influx of my family's money, without the endless supply of my patience and my pension. Her sponsorships dwindled and her follower count, the ultimate measure of her self-worth, stagnated, then slowly began to decline, a digital death knell. The public, always hungry for a new drama, started to notice the strain, the desperation behind her polished posts, the manufactured smiles. I hear she's now hawking questionable diet supplements and promoting obscure, low-tier products from her cramped apartment, a far cry from the luxury brand she once chased. Her empire, built on illusion and greed, simply faded, dissolving like smoke in the wind. And Caspian? My son. He was for a long time utterly lost. The shock of my revelation, the public humiliation of his wife's failure, and the undeniable truth of his own complicity seemed to break something in him. He finally saw Lux for what she was. A manipulative opportunist who had systematically turned him against his own mother, stripping him of his integrity. And he saw himself for what he had become. A weak, silent enabler, a shadow of the kind boy I had raised. There were months of strained silence between us, punctuated by his hesitant, remorseful calls. He tried to apologize, but his words felt hollow, filled with regret that came too late, regret for the loss of his perceived future, and perhaps for the loss of himself. I let him stew, let him truly feel the weight of his choices, the consequences of his silence. Eventually, he separated from Lux. I don't know the full details, but I heard it was a bitter, ugly affair, filled with recriminations and blame from both sides, a final destructive explosion of their toxic union. He's living in a small apartment now, working a steady but unremarkable job, a quiet existence devoid of the superficial glitter Lux once insisted upon. He's starting to rebuild slowly, trying to find his way back to the man he once was, the man I remembered. He visits sometimes, quietly, humbly, bringing me flowers from his small balcony garden. He's starting to look me in the eye again, his gaze no longer clouded by guilt or shame, but with a quiet understanding, a nascent hope. The road to forgiveness for both of us is long, but at least now there's a road. As for me, I am at peace. My home, this lovely house filled with Arthur's memory and my own quiet joys, is truly mine. I walk through its rooms, tend to its garden, and every corner whispers of independence, of strength, of a life reclaimed. The financial security from the heritage property sale means I have no worries, no need to depend on anyone. I can live my life on my own terms, surrounded by the art I love, the books I cherish, and the quiet dignity I've reclaimed. My days are filled with simple pleasures, with the gentle rhythm of a life lived authentically. I spend more time with Clara now, my sweet granddaughter, free from Lux's judgmental gaze. We bake those cookies, we read those stories, and I tell her tales of her great-grandparents, of strength and resilience, of the importance of family, and the true meaning of value, which lies not in fleeting trends or superficial wealth, but in integrity and love. I make sure she understands the difference. I make sure she learns that true power comes not from what you possess, but from who you are. The lesson they learned, the lesson I hope others learn from my story, is this. Never test anyone's patience to its limits. Never mistake kindness for weakness. Never underestimate the quiet strength of those you dismiss as insignificant. Because the gentle ones, the unassuming ones, the ones you think are too old or too confused to understand, often hold the most profound wisdom, the deepest reservoirs of resilience, and the most powerful trump cards. Push them too far, and you might just find that the final chapter of your story is written by the very person you tried to erase. Are there any other mothers out there who have forgotten themselves for the sake of their children's happiness, only to find themselves cast aside? I know my story might resonate with many of you. My channel has many similar stories of life lessons, of strength rediscovered, and of reclaiming your power. If you found a little piece of yourself in my words today, please consider subscribing. Turn on notifications so you don't miss another story. And please, share your own troubles, your own thoughts, your own experiences in the comments below. You are not alone. Thank you for listening.